All right, it's almost time to lock in on baseball once again. And of course, the Mets are the hot topic. GM Sandy Alderson this week essentially said they are not being frugal, they are spending money, and the media is getting it wrong. Well, let's bring in a man who wrote a book about the Mets' financial situation, author Howard Megdal, joining us in studio. Howard, good to see you once again.
Likewise, Steve.
You also recently wrote an article about the Mets, and you basically said, in fact, you literally said they are running a Ponzi scheme. Explain that for us, please.
Well, Ponzi scheme in essence is give us money for X and you'll get a certain amount of returns that come. And in this case, what the Mets have done, and this is from Fred Wilpon on down, is they've said, if you come to the park more, if you spend more money, we'll get more revenue and we'll turn around and we'll spend it on players. Now, typically that's not how any product works. Typically with the product you have to put the quality product out there and then expect people to pay for it. But the Mets did it this way, and to their credit, it actually worked. They went and saw attendance increase 20% last year without a significant jump in any kind of payroll spending. And the net result is the Mets had a ton of extra revenue, $45 to $60 million from postseason alone, and many millions more than that in terms of basic revenue from this regular season and next regular season at their disposal. And what they haven't done is taken that money on a $110 million payroll from last year and turn around and in any way invested in the team.
Doesn't a team have the option to use that money as they choose?
Well, it's funny. There are two parts to that. One is obviously that it's contra their public promises. So at the very least, you could say, well, they're not telling the truth to their fans. But on top of it, it just so happens that precisely this action was what led the Los Angeles Dodgers to be taken away from Frank McCourt by Major League Baseball, almost to the letter. And so there's precedent here within the league as well, not even including conversation about things like Major League Baseball rules and other.
I think the Mets fans out there just want a better understanding of the whole financial situation. How much are the Mets bringing in? How much of that money that they're bringing in is already accounted for elsewhere?
Mm-hmm. Every single year, there's effectively a payroll that is spent on financing debt before you even get to spending a dollar of the Mets money. There's approximately $44 million every year in twice annual debt balloon payments against Citi Field, those payments which continue through December 2045. You also have significantly more than $600 million in loans against SNY and more than $250 million against the New York Mets themselves. They have to finance that debt, that is to pay the interest on the debt, every single year. The sum total of that is effectively equal to a Major League Baseball payroll, or at least the Mets Major League Baseball payroll. The easiest way to get to the $200 million the Yankees spend on payroll every year is to add the roughly $110 million the Mets spent on payroll last year to the amount of debt financing that they had as well.
So they're actually financing essentially two teams. So when in your article, you say that the Mets have less than $10 million that they're spending on the best starting rotation in baseball, plus you add a closer in that as well. Meanwhile, you look at the San Francisco Giants, who are spending $70 million for the same caliber of player. It's a perfect opportunity for the Mets to have that excess money to spend it on hitters. You're saying that it's not that they don't want to spend that money on hitters, it's that they don't have the ability to, possibly?
Well, that's the question. Whether they have simply, and they haven't had the ability to for several years. And the question is, now that a massive amount of revenue has come in, do they continue to not have that ability? And it's possible because they are heavily leveraged, or are they simply making the choice not to? Functionally, the only reason it matters in either case is that it keeps the Mets from operating at close to the optimal level as a Major League Baseball team, which is of concern to their fans, of course, but should be of concern to Major League Baseball as well.
You did years of research on this, wrote a book called Wilpon's Folly that was released a few years ago, and you said that the biggest source of income for the Mets ownership was what Bernie Madoff provided. Right. And once that was taken away, now the Mets and their TV network all of a sudden have to kind of be the breadwinners here.
Right, and that's important for two reasons. One is that you had consistent, significant returns. So the Mets could be well aware, and Sterling, the parent company that is, could be well aware there that this money was coming in regardless. But you also had the ability to use that for liquidity. And so, for instance, in 2007, when Tom Glavine had a bonus that needed to be paid, there was documentation between various Mets front office members saying, you know, look, we need to scrape the bottom of the Madoff accounts in order to get that money to pay. This was how they were operating at sort of a shoestring level at the margins before Madoff went bust, and suddenly they needed to find a way to borrow in order to get some of the money that they lost when Madoff went poof in the night.
But they are holding on right now, and Forbes did estimate, though, that their payroll percentage was third lowest in Major League Baseball. Why is that such a big problem for the Mets? And is this financial situation that we're seeing with this franchise right now just going to be the new normal?
To the point of why it is such a big problem, and do keep in mind that was even based on last year's revenues, so that's before the massive increase in attendance, that's before the postseason revenues that came in. You can expect that number and that ranking to go down significantly. Whether it's the new normal has a lot to do with whether the Mets are capable of making a change, whether Major League Baseball forces them to make a new change, but certainly there's very little reason to see it changing anytime soon if this set of circumstances didn't lead to a change. That is a very inexpensive starting rotation. That is a ton of talent that is pre-arbitration, so not particularly expensive. And the added revenue coming from a run to the World Series. If that didn't change spending habits, it's awfully hard to imagine what would.
So what you're saying now is, because honestly what a lot of Mets fans out there have thought over the past couple of years is, we're out of the woods. There's a light at the end of the tunnel, and we've approached the end of the tunnel at this point, and it's going to be smooth sailing from this point on. It doesn't sound like that's entirely true just now.
No, and the messaging from the team has been trying to make it seem that way. And it tried to seem that way when the settlement was reached with the Madoff trustee. And they tried to make it seem that way in the middle of each subsequent season, or when certain contracts were coming off the books. But the problem has always been the enormous amount of debt they need to service every single year. And until there's a way for that to be paid down, for that to go somewhere, it's really hard to understand how they're not going to have a massive amount of suction at the heart of their revenue base every single year.
You have a new book coming out. It's called The Cardinal Way. It basically details how the Cardinals run their business, a franchise that seems to always push the right buttons. Is there some sort of a formula that the St. Louis Cardinals have that maybe the Mets can learn from?
It's hard to learn from it per se, but what you do have is, from ownership on down, the ability to plan payroll and expenditures 3 to 5 years out. Bill DeWitt, the owner of the Cardinals, and John Mozeliak, the general manager, work hand in glove to be able to figure out what money they have coming in and where it's going. Simply put, Mets baseball ops would laugh at that kind of luxury. They do not have an opportunity to know ahead of time, and as such have to not just spend money infrequently, but when they get the opportunity to spend it when they get the chance.
You can pick up The Cardinal Way on February 23rd, or of course you can pre-order it right now.
Naturally.
Author, writer Howard Megdal, thank you so much for coming in studio and clearing this up for us.
Glad to help.